What's up everybody and welcome back to the channel. As the title of this video suggests, this is the complete bunny experience. I plan on doing one of these eventually for every single descendant in the game, but the idea is that with this video I will share all of the builds which I currently enjoy on a particular descendant and essentially show you how to build those and explain why I don't choose other transcendent mods and all that stuff, giving you an overview of exactly which kind of build you can use with bunny depending on what you are trying to do. Now, bunny makes sense for me to be the first descendant that I do this with because she's the descendant that I have the most hours with. She is a descendant that I use for most of my farming and essentially most of the content that I just quickly want to do fast. So she excels at this, of course, and basically an introduction to bunny, if you will, is the fact that she's essentially an AoE farming machine and pretty much one of the most efficient ways for you to complete repeatable content in the game and get, you know, as much yield as possible per hour. That being said, she's also kind of like a polarizing descendant in a way. I don't see any of the other descendants getting nearly as much hate as she does. Maybe Lepic, I don't know, but nearly as much hate as she does, simply because of the fact that some people feel that she's too OP compared to other descendants in terms of her leveling speed and just her general speed, and so therefore they are calling for nerfs for bunny, or just being irritated by the fact that they don't have a chance to, you know, use their abilities and skills and stuff because bunnies kill the shit out too fast. Personally, for me, I don't see this as a problem. Generally speaking, if I am doing group-based content, except for, I guess, void intercept bosses, and I see a bunny, I'm like, fuck yeah, we're getting this done sooner, and I can move on with my life. So I don't really have a problem with that, but that, you know, I guess differs from person to person. But starting us off, first and foremost, this is the complete bunny experience. So of course we are going to be using ultimate bunny because her best transcendent mod is actually only working on ultimate bunny. It's specific just for ultimate bunny. So I don't want you to click off just yet if you don't have ultimate bunny. I have a build for you when you don't have ultimate bunny and you just have normal bunny, but you still want to be able to like farm and do AoE farming and stuff like that. And that looks a little bit something like this. So let me just move my face over here. So essentially you can then use whichever other transcendent mod you feel like using in here. It's kind of like open to that, but the point here is that we are not using high voltage, which is her you know, sort of like transcendent mod for ultimate bunny only. It's exclusive to ultimate bunny. So in this case, what we are doing is we are focusing on building up lightning emission to be as efficient as possible. So this is the main way in which we kill enemies. We essentially just zip around and we have lightning emission going the entire time, and this AoE kills everything as we just kind of like use our concentration to avoid getting shot and taking damage and getting stuck on, you know, things as we run around. Of course, we want to give ourselves a little bit of survivability in the case of like something like Battle of Stamina. But other than that, you can see that this is fairly glass cannon-ish, with the idea being that we want the pulses from lightning emission to pretty much one-tap enemies, or at the very least 2 to 3 times they should be going down from this. We, of course, focus on things like skill expansion to increase the range of it. We want it to be as big as possible. So by default, the radius of lightning emission is 7 meters. We can increase this by 300%, which means we can take it all the way up to 21 meters. We get fairly close to that at 18.6, so that's good. The other thing is we're also focusing on putting in crit hit and crit damage. Bunny has a fairly low crit multiplier. I would say not one of the lowest in the game, but definitely not great. So the point is that you might be saying, hey, but why would you waste, you know, slots on that? And my answer to that is there's not really any better options for us right now in terms of putting that in there, except if we just want to stack more survivability. And secondly, because you are pulsing out these AoEs, and these AoEs are, if there's 20 enemies, it's hitting 20 enemies. There's way more chances at crits actually happening even at a low amount. So if you have like a 20% chance of critting, like if we go back here and we look, we can see that we have a 30% chance of critting, and our crit hit damage multiplier on our skills is 4.3%. Sorry, 4.3 times, not percent. So the point is, yes, that is low 30%, but 30% of like 100 fucking hits is still going to hit, and it's still going to deal some damage. The other mods, as I mentioned, is basically just all about making your skill last as long as possible. Essentially, all that you're doing with this build is activating speed of light and then making sure that lightning emission is on as you run around and electrocute stuff. That is why MP Collector also works well for us here, because the point is, as we kill enemies, we feed more MP back into our bunny, which means we can just keep using our abilities on cooldown, and we're basically good to go. So this is going to be your go-to if you don't have ultimate bunny. This does exceptionally well. It's obviously not as good as Ultimate Bunny with something like high voltage, but this does get the job done. And I tend to kind of like sometimes run this when I'm doing normal content. Some of the weapon patterns and things like that for some of the weapons are still unlocked in normal, like for instance Thunder Cage is actually normal missions that you have to do, and this actually just destroys that while kind of like trivializing that content. Yes, of course high voltage would do it as well, but the point is you can do this with normal bunny. Then next up we have what I would consider my solo farming build. So this is pretty much the one that I feel the most. This is pretty much if I'm doing anything out in the open world, like void fragments, if I'm doing infiltrations, anything like that. And the point is, this of course uses high voltage, which is Bunny's, you know, best mod by far, best transcendent mod by far. What high voltage does is it changes your lightning emission to not be an AoE anymore, but rather to be 3 arcs coming out of you, so killing 3 enemies at a time. But what it also does is it increases your radius quite drastically, meaning that you can go much further in terms of from the enemies and still hit them with this. And it also juices it up. It deals a whole bunch more damage. So if you are used to not running high voltage and you're used to doing the damage that you're seeing with lightning emission usually, then this is going to surprise you when you use high voltage, because you're going to see 1.2, 1.4, sometimes 1.6 million hits when you hit an enemy. And this means that this is exceptionally good at also killing bosses. Now, and by bosses, I mean bosses at the end of infiltrations. So basically here you'll see that in terms of like the no voltage, meaning the one that we can't, you know, use high voltage, we can see that the only real differences here is that instead of battle of stamina, I'm actually using HP amplification here. So I'm even making myself more glass cannon-y in a way by taking some of my shield away, but for that we're getting a massive amount of max HP. Then you'll also notice that I have 2 sort of like small changes at the bottom here. So instead of using frugal mindset, which gives us more range and less skill cost and skill duration plus, we are in the solo farming one that uses high voltage. We're going deeper into the damage here, and we're putting on focus electric, and we're putting on focus and singular. This is important because lightning emission is both an electric and a singular skill, so it's going to give us additional damage on that, while also just dropping our cooldowns quite significantly. The rest I think is fairly straightforward. We have some skill, crit hit damage, crit hit rate. We've got additional range, and then of course we've got front lines and emergency measures, which are the 2 ones which give you both crit hit damage and crit hit rate. And last but not least, we have amplification control, which kind of like gives us that shield back that we lose with HP amplification, and also increases our skill effective range even more. Now, if we look at this, we'll see that again we're around 30% of skill critical hit rate with a 4.3 multiplier, so pretty damn decent, and you're really going to be raking in some decent numbers with this. This is pretty much, like I said, my standard setup for Bunny, and I use this for every single thing that I'm doing solo. Now you'll notice that this has MP Collector in it once again, because this is just a really good way to keep topped up and to make sure that you always have enough, you know, mana to be able to just cast your skills on cooldown and be good to go. Now, in the case of you wanting to do farming but wanting to do it in a group, you have to make one small change here. Well, let's say 2 small changes. MP Collector is really good when you're solo, because the point is you get this MP if you are the one that does the kill shot, if you kill the enemy. If you are running in groups, you might find yourself being starved of MP, of mana, because the point is your friends, your buddies in your party are actually getting the kill shots on the enemies, which means you don't have a way to replenish your energy. So in that case, in group farming, I make 2 changes. I drop amplification control, thereby losing some of our range and getting this, you know, problem with our max shield now actually going down. But I add in energy collection, which gives us MP recovery plus 57%, which means our mana by itself can regenerate faster. And then we add in dangerous ambush, which works really well in groups, because the point is this is works well if enemies aren't targeting you. And since you're in a group, you might have other your party members that are actually having aggro that the enemy is focused on, which means you're going to get this additional skill power from you that's going to just, you know, dump a lot of damage onto the enemy. So the only 2 big differences between this and solo farming is essentially the swap, as you can see here, because MP Collector is kind of like not doing its job for us. And then last but not least, we also have a boss build. Once again, just using high voltage. By boss build, I mean a build that you can actually use when you do Void Intercept bosses. Now, I personally would not recommend Bunny for Void Intercept boss farming, except for some really, really niche applications. If we look at the Void Intercept bosses, of course, bosses that are weak to lightning is good, obviously. But the point is that generally she doesn't have the same level of damage that you see with some of the better boss killing descendants like Lepic and some of the ones which bring like, you know, utility and things like that, like Enzo and Sharon, for example. That being said, Devourer you can kill fairly easily. I think you can get like a less than 30-second kill time on that, which is pretty damn easy. Of course, your weapon choice also matters there. And then I do want to give a personal shout out to Obstructor as well, where Bunny can be really good. Obstructor's in vulnerability phase, where you have the portals and you have these the orbs coming out of the portals. Bunnies can shoot those orbs from the ground out of the sky, and it's a really great way to essentially nullify that phase of the fight, because you will pretty much have one bunny being able to handle one portal just by themselves, because the lightning emissions will be doing so much work there for you. But the rest of the build here essentially, as I said, just kind of like stays the same. The reason why you'll notice that I don't change too much with the builds is because I also want to save you catalysts. So I don't want you spending 20, 30, 40 fucking catalysts. I mean, it's not going to be that much, right? But I don't want you to have to catalyze multiple cells over and over. So you'll notice that I try to kind of like use the best in both worlds. So with here, you'll see that we retain the Dangerous Ambush that we have from group farming, because in this case, Dangerous Ambush is doing the same thing for us, right? The other people in your party will probably have aggro, which means you'll be able to deal some more damage to the boss. And we're putting some additional HP, survivability in for us. All of my other bunny builds are kind of glass cannony, but it's because of the content that you're using them against is not that difficult, and so therefore you can kind of like get away with it. But in the case of Void Intercept bosses, you need at least some survivability. This is still not the best. You kind of like have to know what you're doing. You have to not stand in the fire, and you have to not get hit by shots all that much, but this does give you some survivability and means that you can take a little bit of damage. Now, in case you're wondering which one of these builds you should be using if you want to do infiltrations like Magister Lab and so on, of course, Boss Time works very well here because it does give you the additional survivability, and Dangerous Ambush works well, especially if you're doing those in groups. But I tend to also use group farming and solo farming, and so technically all three of these will do well. I tend to think that if you are struggling with survivability, it's better to give yourself a little bit of additional HP. Maybe you're still learning Bunny and you're kind of like getting used to avoiding fire and that sort of thing. And if you find yourself struggling, that you, for example, if you're using solo farming, that you're not getting a lot of the kills inside an infiltration, then of course something like group farming is also really good because you have the additional energy collection here. Then the last and final build that I want to share here before I let you go is kind of like a bit of a meme, but of course there are some people who think that Bionic Fuel is kind of cool. Basically what Bionic Fuel does is it replaces your second ability and pretty much turns it into an always run ability that drains your HP instead of your actual MP. Now, the thing when it comes to building this is that you might be thinking there's a way that you can offset the HP drain and essentially just, you know, give yourself ways of regaining enough HP fast enough that it's not a problem. That's not really the case. There's really no way, since the drain from this is pretty insane. It's max HP times 8%. So I haven't found a mod combination that gives me enough back to negate this effect. So then you have to look elsewhere to actually survive, because essentially what this does is it reduces your HP all the way down to like pretty much nothing, and then of course as soon as your shield is depleted you fucking die because you get shot, and so it's not great. So what we can do, of course, is with the recent changes or not so recent changes to overwhelming shield, we can lean into that and essentially stack our shield as high as we possibly can, which means that we don't care about the fact that overwhelming shield drops us down to max HP 1, because we're gonna have Bionic Fuel active the entire time. Now this means that we are running fast the entire time, not quite as fast as you run with the normal skill, but it means that you have this additional 30% speed increase the entire time. And then what we're doing in terms of a build is we're focusing on just making our shield exceptionally chunky, and so that we can actually tank some damage. So in this case here, overwhelming shield with shield collector works really well because we have this boost to our shield, and any kind of HP that we slap in with like increased HP as well as HP from our gear is going to just increase the size of our shield. And then we have shield collector, which means that when we kill enemies, just like MP collector gives you back MP, shield collector gives you back shield. So we have this defense of ours being replenished the entire time. Other than that, we now, of course, use the normal version of lightning emission, so it's not high voltage. So in this case, we want to make this cool down as fast as possible. So nimble fingers is helpful for us here, but we also want to be just focusing in on a little bit of additional damage. So focus on electric, focus on singular, giving us some more cooldown. And last but not least, we want to increase the range quite drastically, actually, with something like maximize range, because we want this to be pretty much at its maximum, which is 21 meters. That means that this plays the same as basically no voltage bunny, so not having high voltage. You're running around the entire time and you're making sure that lightning emission is on, and it's basically killing the enemies. Now this has still a fairly crappy skill hit rate of 21% and a 1.3 multiplier, since we sacrifice so many of our mods for making this bionic fuel effect work. Like I said, it's a fucking meme build, but it does, however, keep you up the entire time, and you basically won't die. Now you have 10,000 shield, which is not a lot. All right, you can stack this up a lot more by sacrificing even more mods and putting more HP in, as well as shuffling your gear around a little bit. But this is pretty damn decent, and with this build, you will have no problem with doing pretty much everything except, I would say, Void Intercept bosses. Definitely don't use this build for Void Intercept bosses. There's definitely better options out there. But this is something that you can do if Bionic Fuel does interest you, if you want to build for that. Like I said, I wanted to include it because none of the other Transcendent mods has anything of value for me. A while back there was a build that you could build with, I think it was electric condense, because that was bugged, and so you could spin this up and essentially you could like one tap certain bosses and stuff, but they patched this fairly quickly. At least by the time I kind of like found out about this, it was already patched. So none of the other ones are fairly decent for me. Electric charge, superconductor, and electric transition, these are all options that you can test on Bunny, but in the end I feel like the only really super usable and great mod on Bunny happens to be high voltage, which is her ultimate mod. I did want to include one other option, which is why I went for Bionic Fuel. Of course, if you're using no voltage here, you can use this build to test any of the others, which I have done. None of them were sexy in any way, so that's kind of like why I didn't do it. But this over here happens to be all of the builds that I fuck with when it comes to Bunny, and these essentially allow me to do everything that I want to do with Bunny. If you are planning on running Bionic Fuel, of course, bear in mind that you should be stacking as much HP as possible on your external components, so something like this where you're getting double rolls on max HP, or at the very least on additional things like defense and so on, is really good, because of course defense also affects the strength of your shield and actually helps your shields to also take less damage, very much like it does for HP. So you want to be stacking as much HP as possible, and pretty much here I just have like a handbag of different things, different external components that just have as much max HP as possible. The more you stack, if you can get multiple, like let's say 5 or 6 max HPs here, you can get this all the way very close to something like 16 to 20,000 shield, which is overwhelming shield, and pardon the pun, obviously almost unkillable. Now for the last part of this video, I actually just want to quickly cover some weapons that are good with Bunny. So of course the same weapons that are good on any other Descendant is good on Bunny. What I mean by that is things like Thunder Cage is of course exceptionally good. So where's my Thunder Cage? Bam, that's good. And then of course Greg's Reverse Fate is also good. Python is good. Pretty much anything that you can use to run and gun is generally good with Bunny as well. And then of course the big boss man, Enduring Legacy, as always, is really good, but that's just because Enduring Legacy is pretty much good on any fucking Descendant that you put it on. For your reactor, you have two choices. If you are using your Bunny for anything except the Void Intercept boss, skill effect range, skill duration up is good, skill cooldown is good, additional electric damage is good, additional singular damage is good. For me particularly, I like the skill effect range and skill duration setup for me. It gives me a little bit of additional range on my AoE, as well as giving me additional duration on them, which means that they last longer before I have to put them on again. In terms of gear itself, there's two options. By the way, also, if you are actually looking to use a reactor to fight against Colossi, then of course you want to have something with additional skill attack when attacking colossi, and then maybe something like electric skill power boost, singular skill power boost. Skill crit hit damage is okay. You aren't critting as much. As mentioned, she has a fairly lowish crit, but when you crit at one of those 30% times, you are going to be hitting a little bit harder. This is what you would look for in case of like wanting to use this against a Void Intercept boss. Of course, the other thing also worth mentioning is if you have something in the ultimate variety, you have another 20% of additional skill power boost. This is a purple reactor, so it's kind of like the bottom of the barrel, but a ultimate version of that will give you even just a little bit more damage. In terms of external components, if you're looking for survivability, this is the current setup that I have. Of course, trying to focus on as much HP as possible, and in the cases where I cannot get HP, I take defense, and then of course also making sure that I get a decent amount of resistances from each piece, so you can get a different resistance family from each one of the 4 pieces of external component. But actually here I use 1 piece polar, 2 pieces of venom, and 1 piece of annihilation. Of course you can use something like Slayer. Slayer is really good. Let me just find it quickly. Here we go. You can use something like Slayer because that's going to increase your skill power by that 26% over there. But for me, overall, I just like the super duper survivability that I get from something like this. And this is just going to be very, very hardy and difficult to kill. Originally, when the season 1 mechanic dungeons came out, the intercepts, then this was the setup that I used for my bunny, because those used to be really tough and you would take a shitload of damage in those dungeons. So this was the setup that I used for that, and then I just ended up keeping this, and this just ended up being the thing. But your other option is of course a farming set. Since most of the time you will be using bunny to farm content, it makes absolute sense to choose 4 external components which have like all of the farming substats on them, like for example additional Kuiper drop rate, module drop rate, XP gain, firearm proficiency gain, gold drop rate, and so on. So this is just a really good setup as well if you are primarily using your bunny to like farm for reactors for your other descendants or something like that, or level up weapons or something. This can be a really good setup to pretty much help you with that as well. And that's it for the video, guys. This is every single build that I use with my bunny, and I kind of pretty much have reached the point where I would not change a single thing here. I've catalyzed as many of her cells as I want to. I've spent as much money and time on this descendant as I want to, and it's on to the next one. Most likely the next descendant that I'll target for a video like this will be Lepic, as Lepic has my 2nd most playtime, maybe just barely being challenged by someone like Sharon. So maybe Sharon's next. I guess we'll have to see. You'll have to watch the channel. But let me know in the comments down below which descendant you'd like me to have next in a show like this, or just tell me which descendant you prefer to play, who is your best in slot, and the descendant that you have the most hours on. Other than that, it's just super important to me that you have a fantastic morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. Till next video, fucking cheers.